Hey everyone, and welcome to a matchup between Chovy's Azir and Nemesis' Jace. And this is a matchup that I really wanted to cover because obviously they're both really good players, but also because I think Azir vs Jace is a very interesting matchup. It's a matchup where there's a lot of kind of back and forth, right? There's a lot of different win conditions that both of them can play for, which we'll go through as the game goes on, but examples being like, generally Azir is better kind of in that isolated 1v1 and in short trades, whereas Jace, he wants to skirmish. If he can get long trains with phase rush and stuff, that can be really good. There's also a lot of interesting things around itemization, I think, in this matchup, so we're going to get to those as we go through, and I'm going to kind of talk about this from both players' perspective rather than just focusing on one. However, the very first thing I want to focus on is actually the level 1 and the runes. So Chovy's gone for the Hail of Blades, right? This is something that high elo Azirs have been experimenting with a bit more, so I've seen it more recently, and basically it's to give a mix between laning power and still having good skirmishing and decent scaling. It also allows you, if I can click on the runes, it gives you Taste of Blood, which is kind of nice, right, for having additional sustain in lane, especially now that you don't go Corrupting Pot. You can get extra sustain with Taste of Blood, but obviously you do lose some stuff out for it, right? Like you lose the Sorcery Tree, he's gone Inspiration second. So the reason I think Hail of Blades is interesting in this matchup in particular is because of what happened earlier in the year. So what I'm actually going to show you is this matchup here. So yeah, you guys can see this. So this is a matchup between T1 and DRX, right? And in this game here, Poby, he takes Phase Rush and Resolve, and he trades on this Azir very heavily at level 1, who has Conqueror, and he's actually unable to trade back. So you can see he just comes into the lane initially, and with the Conqueror rune, especially trading into Bone Plating, isn't actually able to do much back, and you can see that the trades, they go very badly very early on, and he's just able to completely zone him off the wave. He's just zoning him. He uses this to get level 2 first, and then he zones him off completely, right? So this is, obviously, Conqueror has really nice scaling, right? But if you lose so much very early on, it can be a big problem. So obviously, I don't want to read into the rune too much, because it could be that, again, Chovy's just experimenting with different runes, but it could also be that he thinks, all right, versus Jace, if in order to kind of prevent this level 1 cheese that can happen with, Phase Rush Resolve, I need to take Hail of Blaze, and that can stop that sort of trade from coming out. So it's hard to say. He might have thought about it a little, or maybe he just doesn't care. I don't know, but I think it's quite interesting anyway. Let's go to the lane itself then. So very initially, and kind of in the first few levels of the lane, Azir is going to be stronger at short trades. And this is mainly because, well, Jace can't really get to Azir to get on him for short trades, right? Like, again, unless you look for some sort of phase rush cheese at level 1. Most likely, you're just going to be getting poked off by W like this. And it can be very hard, I think, especially into the laning keystone of something like an area or a phase rush to trade back effectively. So Jace is expecting to kind of give up a little bit in this stage of the lane. And normally, like, this isn't too bad. You can see he goes melee and manages to trade pretty decently there. Normally, you do need to be a little careful, like, how much mana you use on Jace early, because until you get your tier, you actually have... You don't have, like, super high mana cost, but you also don't have enough combos in you to really kill your opponent most of the time. I mean, unless they really overextend. So you can see Chovy is abusing his initial lead in the lane. He's building up the wave. He's probably going to look to harass under tower. He's going to place a ward first just to make sure he's safe. Should be on the Raptors and does spot out Rammus. And so he can do a couple things here. He can continue to harass. He can continue to push. And I think he'll do so. So here's kind of your first choice you have to make. You could let this wave come back to you. The thing about that would mean it would make Jace more gankable. It would make you a bit safer from Rammus. But Azir's probably not too worried about that, right? So Azir is not particularly gankable early, because once he hits level 3, he's going to have a lot of safety. Rammus also not super great at ganking very early in the game. And obviously Jace has no gank setup. So in terms of pure 1v1, it's actually better to keep pushing. That way you keep your kind of level advantage. You keep the ability to harass your opponent under tower. So this is Chovy just abusing all the basic things, basically, of just being a stronger 1v1 laner. So if you're Nemesis at this point, what can you do? I mean, the only difference you might want to change is you could start D-Shield if you really wanted, but I think D-Blade is better. I mean, it definitely scales better, and I feel like you should be able to get through this lane fine. So you're just kind of expecting to lose a bit early and trying to sustain up what you can. So there's nothing really too special to kind of talk about at this point. Now, probably the next thing to think about, though, is actually the itemization. So one difference, I guess, about this patch is because D-Blade is stronger, this doesn't really mean that Jaces go for longsword refillable anymore. And the reason that's a big difference is because in the past, what a lot of Jaces used to do is they would actually rush out Dirk before going tier. And the reason for that was because if you base and you buy something like let's say you bought like tier longsword boots, is that if you're against someone who's just going straight combat power, right? So you're against an Azir that goes like Sorks or Chapter, you're just so far behind in combat power that it's very, very hard to contest. So that was like a good reason for starting refillable and longsword before. But now with the D-Blade start, yes, you're a bit stronger on the D-Blade, but it almost guarantees that there's no way you can get your Dirk in the first base, especially in a losing matchup. And so this can be kind of problematic because it means that not only is Azir gonna like win out in these early trades, probably get the better first base, probably force Jace to recall without as much gold. The gold is probably also going to be invested somewhat into scaling items, you know, something like tier. Most likely the base will be tier longsword. And so if you're Chovy at this point, you really just want to like keep harassing as much as possible. You want to force this Jace to base on really awkward gold and try get a base of your own when it's like a really good time for you, basically. Now this was a bit weird. I mean, it was just a pretty random gank mid from Nautilus. It was well played for sure. And this is a bit better for Nemesis. I mean, Jace is better at skirmishing and fighting early than Azir, so any of this kind of chaos is actually good for him. It is kind of bad because he lost Flash though. And this is another thing, right? So another win condition for Azir in general is that at level 6, he is very, very good gank setup. And that's something that Jace will have to be careful of because Jace essentially is an immobile mid-champion, right? Like he does a phase rush, he does have the disengage, but against a champ like Azir with the ult, can be very, very vulnerable. So Chovy, you know, again, kind of doing everything as expected, pushes the extra wave to ensure he has the better first base, and now we'll look to reset. Okay, so we come back to lane, and we got to talk about win conditions again. So let's take a look at this. Right now, you're Azir, you've got Sork shoes, and you're up against a Jace with, again, tier longsword refillable, right? So this is a lot of combat power that is very heavily in Azir's favor. So if you're Chovy at this point, you basically want to continue like isolated 1v1. You want to make it really, really difficult for Jace to kind of, you know, lane on these items. You want to really hard punish this and use it to build up a more significant advantage. If you're the Jace in this situation, I mean, what are you thinking? Probably you're playing for your next spike of Dirk. So the good news is, if Azir goes for Sork shoes, right, most likely his next base will be Chapter, which means there's no way he's getting any armor early. He's never going to buy a Seekers. He's never going to get, you know, a cloth armor or anything, which means on your Dirk power spike, you're going to be incredibly strong. It also means that there's like kind of a win, there's like a win condition of attrition here, maybe, just because Azir will have a bit less mana and you are going to have some more. That being said, like Azir doesn't use a lot of mana, so it's a bit more difficult. But it's kind of something you could look to play for. Mainly though, I think if you're Jace in this situation, you're kind of, again, just trying to kind of weather the storm, not die to the gank at this point. He does manage to get a trade onto Azir. It's hard to say if this is worth it, to be honest, because I don't know. I kind of think it's not worth it. I don't know. It is hard to say because you want to be able to trade and set up ganks, but I feel like you're a lot more gankable as the Jace, especially without Flash. And that can kind of just lead you into, you know, being forced out of the lane a bit too early. So for now, just going to try playing the range, try and, you know, play where he doesn't have Flash, which is all good, you know, trying to stay away from Azir pretty much. Now, Azir is getting pretty low, and maybe Jace can look to poke out. That would probably be your thing at this point, is if you can look to continue to play range, at least while Azir is, like, down on cooldowns, you can look to play kind of aggressive. So Rammus comes mid and kind of relieves a bit of pressure. So it looks like we're probably going to see a reset here, which is exactly what happens. Now, unfortunately for Jace, he did not manage to get the Dirk here. And I think this is kind of a problem, and I feel like maybe Nemesis could have like traded a little smarter here, or it could be a little bit due to his runes. So I'll show you the runes real quick. He does have Inspiration, right? And he also has Gathering Storm, which is a lot of scaling. Now, obviously, scaling is really good if you can get away with it, but if it continually forces you into sort of mediocre bases, it does cost you pretty heavily, right? And I wonder if he had, say, like Scorch, and he had Second Wind, if he had been able to stay in lane long enough to pick up the Dirk, if he had gotten the Dirk at base earlier, it might have actually been better overall, and I think it would have, because the kind of problem you have here is that, like, yes, you get another base off, and you're in an okay position, but you still are ultimately picking up components, and you don't have that Dirk spike. So I feel like, while, I don't know, Chovy is doing a good job of it, I wonder if maybe Nemesis could have changed his runes a little bit, just to make sure he gets that better base at some point here. But okay, you know, bases go off, and we'll keep playing it and see what kind of win con we're looking for now. So, as I said before, Jace is a bit better at skirmishing, right? Like, Jace is generally better at roaming, he's better at getting into the river, and all stuff like that. So if you are being forced to base first, right, generally that's a negative because you're going to spend less gold than your opponent. You're likely going to lose a little bit of XP and stuff. Generally, you're going to be put behind. But the one thing it does give you is if you base before your opponent, you're going to have a wave of priority. And this means if you can find something to do with this priority, whether it's like invading or roaming or warding or something, sometimes that can help you get back into the game a little bit. So let's see here. He crashes a cannon wave knowing that Azir has to come here, right? Because Azir has only just recalled. So what can you do with this priority? Well, you could look top, but this is a 0-3 Yone and a 3-0 Fiora. It's possibly gankable, but it's on the other side of your jungler, so you probably don't want to go here in general. So I think playing towards his jungler here is probably the right decision, and you've got a bot lane that looks very diveable. So Jace is just able to kind of come down here, and I believe he ends up sniping a kill over the wall. So he gets a good kill on Alistar. Now, in some sense, this is kind of lucky, because it's like, is this going to happen every time? No, probably not, but there's pretty much always something you can do with your priority, whether it's just dropping that ward, or whether it's even just like leaning into Fog of War, right? There's always something you can do, even if you're on the losing side of things, you're still going to have some win conditions to play towards. Now let's go back to the Chovy side for a bit. So even though Jace got that kill, it's fine because that gold has not been spent yet. So at least for now, the combat stats are definitely very heavily in favor of Azir. At the same time, Jace's flash is still down for a little bit, so you could look to go aggressive, and that's exactly what's going to happen here. So the Jace goes in and gets immediately ulted towards Viego, which kind of sucks, and he loses a lot of his health, and I believe that Viego actually ends up chasing him down and killing them. So this is kind of unfortunate timing, and I'll show you why. So if we go back and we kind of look at this from Jace's perspective, you're thinking, okay, like if you don't have flash, why would you go really aggressive onto the Azir here, knowing that you're going to get ulted? So I mean, why did he do it? Well, if we look at the map right now, there's kind of reasons for and against it. And the biggest reason for is that we have Nautilus with us, right? So you might be thinking this Jace here, like, right, sure, I don't win the straight up 1v1, but what I do have is my support right next to me with flash. So if I can force Azir to use cooldowns, if I can force him to kind of trade back on me, it's possible I can come out of this on top with a Nautilus next to me, maybe look for a kill, maybe chunk him and get a nice base, and then I'd be able to get my Dirk, right? So there's a lot of reasons to do this. Reasons against it though, I mean, you don't see anyone on the map. So there's no one showing bot or top, and you don't have any vision on their jungler. On top of that, like if you look at the lanes, so Rammus is coming out of base. This means there'll be no counter gank from your jungler. Top lane is not gankable because Yone's not even there. Lucian's not gankable because Lucian's not even there. So basically, it's pretty likely that mid will be the gankable position on the map, right? Because that's only the only real place to go for both teams. So it's a good chance that this is like a 2v2 or maybe even a 3v2. Now, I don't exactly blame Nemesis for doing this because that's a hell of a lot of info to think about all at one time. And he probably just thought, like, right, he's got Nautilus with us. Even if someone else shows up, you know, at worst it's like a 2v2 or something, and he'll be fine. So he goes in, he gets aggressive. This is something you can do, especially with Phase Rush, is if Azir does commit his Q forward, right? It means that you're going to be able to get aggressive on him. I think, actually, did he have Q? Maybe he had Q. Hold on, let me just check. I might have just made something up. I believe he used Q. Okay, so he actually didn't. So normally you go aggressive when he doesn't have Q, right? Because then you can kind of chase him into him with the soldiers. But actually Azir had Q here, so that's a little surprising. But anyway, he takes a lot of damage. I think better to wait for people to be on the map, better to wait for Azir to use Q. And this counter gank by Viego ends up costing Jace pretty heavily, because this would be about when you're going to spike really hard, right? If you can get a successful base off here, you get the Dirk, and then you're in a really good spot. But unfortunately, this death sets you back like a really long way, because even though you are going to pick up the Dirk, you're going to lose like a lot for it, and Azir should be really strong. Now, it's kind of fortunate that Azir came and got involved in this skirmish, and I think this is probably a mistake from Chovy. So I think if you're Azir, right, you don't really want to be involved in skirmishes too early, especially given that you just use ult, right? Like, you're not very strong here, and you don't really have your team here either, right? We got like Alistar on bot. We know that Nautilus was around mid. So I think here, if you're Chovy, you probably just, honestly, sack your jungler, push this wave, take a play, and then reset, and you should be incredibly far ahead of Jace. But I think here, Azir didn't really play to his win condition, and he gets punished pretty heavily for it. So now he's forced to take a really long pathway around, and Nemesis can come punish this mid by shoving this wave in and getting the plate. So this is really good. On top of this, another big cost of this, right? And this might even be the bigger thing. If you're Azir here, right? You know how I was saying before that if you're the loser in this matchup, you still have those kind of you have those times where you can win, where you shove a wave, or a wave gets shoved into you, you base or you die or whatever, and then you come back on the map and you have one wave to do something with your priority. So if you're Azir and you really want to just make sure that there's no chaos happening, right? You just want to kind of slow down the game as much as possible, which I think you want. You don't really want chaos when you have Azir, Jinx, and Fiora. All you need to do is chill out. If you're Azir, you probably want to just shove this wave and base. Honestly, you could even base right now and just be on the map at the same time as Jace. That way he never gets that wave of priority to do anything. But because you come here and because you end up, using your tempo, and because you end up dying, or rather getting chunked out, I don't think he dies, we give Jace a window to kind of play to his win condition of like, well, Jace is actually very, very strong in a skirmish right now. He has a lot of lethality, and with this wave pushed in, without the kind of Azir to keep him in check, to keep him in lane, he's able to move to these fights and pick up kills. So I would argue in this case that because Chovy didn't really play to his win condition that well there, that Nemesis is able to just basically punish that in a sense, or take advantage of it, I guess would be the better term, and come and grab a lot of gold for himself here, which is really, really nice. And an absolutely huge win, right? Because now the gold is going to be quite far in his favor mid, which is really good given that you're in a losing 1v1 matchup. So I hope you can see that there's like quite a lot of stuff happening back and forth here, and I think both players have done well and made mistakes. I think there's ways for both of them to play it better, but also it's still a very skilled game from both of them. So let's kind of go to it now. I mean, Jace is actually ahead of gold, but he hasn't spent a lot of it, right? Like, he's sitting on 1k total. So that means that while you might be stronger after you get your base off, you're probably not stronger right now. Now, if you can get good trades on Azir, like, as I was saying before, if Azir uses Q forward, you can get quite aggro here. And I think if you're Nemesis, okay, you've got a Lucian flanking, so that definitely allows you to do this a bit more freely. But I actually think he probably would have gone for this, even if the Lucian weren't here. So what I'd be thinking is, right, like, we have flash advantage, so worst case, we can flash out or we can flash over something. Also, he just queued forward, which means if you can get inside his range with phase rush, you should absolutely annihilate him in a trade. Like, I really think even without Lucian, this would be a very good trade. Obviously, with the Lucian on top of him, it ends up being even better, and Chovy ends up going down, which is great. I mean, chaos is very favorable for the Jace side of this matchup. So we push in, take the plate, reset, and now we've got a huge item spike. I mean, look at how strong we are now compared to Azir. Azir's got, like, really terrible components, and this Jace is extraordinarily strong. So if you're Jace in this situation, what are you looking for now? Pretty much to just fight anything. And I think if you're Chovy, like, if you can continue kind of, like, isolated poking, that's good, but you've got to be, like, really, really careful. Because if you take a full-on trade against Ghostblade Jace, it's definitely not going to work out. But in terms of just, like, staying behind creeps and poking, you definitely can do that. So, I'm going to kind of skim through this for a while, so I think there's nothing too interesting for a bit. Yeah, I'll just skim through this. I remember there was a lot of interesting things in the mid-game, so we'll kind of get to that. But for now, both sides just kind of scaling, farming, not a whole lot to it, kind of waiting for everyone else on the map to be ready to fight. You still have to be a little careful here as Jace of the gank setup, especially when your team is off the map. So same thing as before, like if your support is missing or you don't have vision, like let's go to the Jace's vision. When you come back to lane, right? If you come back to this sort of setup where you have like no vision bot side, no vision top side, you don't see the support or jungle, you should try chill out just for a little bit. Establish like a little bit of vision for yourself. Now you see Alistair and now you see Viego, so it's fine to play aggressive, which is completely fine, and goes forward, gets the ult out. But anyway, let's kind of skip through here into the mid-game. Okay, so here's like another interesting thing. So when the mid-game starts, right, generally the things that Azir has going for them in the mid-game is that he farms very quickly, he can push very efficiently, and he's generally quite safe from ganks, right, because he can just WEQ away from anything. So what about Jace's win conditions on the side lane? Well, Jace has a lot of angles on the side lane to poke people, right? Like, it's easy to poke people over walls. You also have a lot of chase down. Like, Jace in a long lane with Ghostblade and Phase Rush can definitely chase you down. So if you're in Azir in this situation, what do you want to do? Well, you probably just want to play it safe. I think especially in a situation where you have your Viego topside, you're probably just looking to kind of chill out on the bot side, especially when you see the Jace here. You probably just want to leave rather than getting aggressive, right? If you're Nemesis in this situation, I mean, what are you looking for? I think you've got your jungler on your side of the map. You have this a massive combat stat advantage, so you just want to look to fight, which is exactly what happens here. He manages to come down. Chovy does pop the ult, and Nemesis could leave here and then just like look to retrade later on, but he identifies as he has a kill window and he picks up a solo kill. So this is really just abusing the fact that, well, one, he's really far ahead, but I think it's also Chovy not really, again, playing to his win con. Like, I think you do just need to like look to relax and scale a bit here. You are kind of weak-sided, maybe just like place the tower and play it a little slow. Don't give Jace the way onto you. But yeah, like it ends up picking up a kill, which is really, really nice. So I think that is pretty much everything I actually wanted to show in this VOD. It actually does end up being a win for Chovy, but he doesn't really like do a whole lot, to be honest. Like, he does farm well, but I'd say Nemesis definitely played better in this game. So what was kind of the learnings from this game? Well, in my opinion, it was that even though it's like a losing 1v1 matchup for Jace, there's still plenty of ways to win it, right? Like, there's ways to use your priority when you have the opportunities. There's, you know, times when you can look for trades, like when the Azir queues too far forward. There's certain spikes, like on Dirk or something, where you can get very aggressive. At the same time, if you're Azir, you know, there's plenty of stuff you can do too. Like, you are winning the 1v1, and you do want to make sure that you're kind of, you know, pushing harder and getting the better bases and stuff. But there's even more stuff that could have been done. So, like, for example, you know, if you're Azir in this matchup and you want to stop your opponent, now this could be an assassin, it could be a Jace, whoever it is, if you want to stop your opponent from getting involved in many fights, you can do stuff like base a wave earlier, get back to mid, and kind of just keep priority, you know, make sure that Jace can't roam around the map. So hopefully you guys found this VOD interesting. It's definitely a different style than I've done before, because I was kind of talking about both sides of the matchup. But I think it was a game that kind of deserved it. And yeah, I think there was a lot of interesting stuff from both sides, and kind of cool that I think, again, both players like very, very good. But I think there's like a little bit of room for improvement. And of course, like, I'm sure they have different opinions on it too. You know, I'm not going to come out here and say that I know everything, but hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.